what the internet does is it weeds out inefficiencies, bypasses middlemen, bypasses experts. What it's really good at in the crowdfunding space is funding deals as to which there would otherwise be limited information.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Real Estate Investor MBA. My name is Tejas Gosai, and I've had the honor of helping hundreds of investors achieve the American dream by creating generational wealth through real estate. I've spent the past few years interviewing the most knowledgeable experts I could find in the business to cut your learning time and conquer the hardest subjects in the game. Check out rei.mba, which my team and I have packed with over 75 interviews and free access to our real estate roadmap, webinars, and publications. If you're listening, I am rooting for you, and you're already on your way to financial freedom. Cheers and happy hunting. I love picking the guests on this program. I try to have the best and most knowledgeable experts to help me personally get through the times that we're in, sharpen your skills, and rely on folks that have been through many cycles in real estate and have decades of experience so that us, I'm in my 40s, can adapt to the crazy market that we're in. So Mark Roderick, we have a couple similarities, which is great. He is a tax attorney who pools capital legally and invests that capital in real estate to create returns for investors. I do the same thing. I went to law school. I'm not a practicing attorney. I do have my commercial real estate license. I am pooling capital with accredited investors, high net worth individuals, and investing in real estate. And I do this in the Lehigh Valley. It's where I live. My team and I have closed millions in this community, specifically in multifamily, over the past almost decade now. So it's great to have Mark on the program to share his knowledge, insight, and how he keeps people legal in doing the same thing. So Mark began his career as a tax lawyer. He handled mergers and acquisitions for a very large company. And he considers himself a boring corporate and securities lawyer. Since the Jobs Act of 2012, which we talk a lot about in detail, he has spent all of his time in the crowdfunding space. And today he's one of the leading crowdfunding and fintech lawyers in America. He regularly writes blogs that are widely received, and he offers a wealth of legal and practical information for portals and issuers. And we'll get into that in a bit. He speaks about crowdfunding at events across the country, and he represents industry participants across the country and world as well. He is an evangelist about crowdfunding. By making capital available to a broad spectrum of entrepreneurs and by making available to ordinary Americans the kind of investment previously limited to the very wealth, crowdfunding can reinvigorate American capitalism and begin to address the serious wealth and income inequality in our country. So he believes in this passionately, and he thinks that everyone is capable to take part in real estate through a few specific avenues. I'm super excited to have him on the program. Enjoy. Mark, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. I just said a big intro about you. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
We were chatting about what we should talk about, and I think first, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. I want to cut right into what's happening now and some of the things you've seen with your clients.
Well, it was a bright blue day when I was born. I'm going to tell you my whole personal background. Now, I have been practicing law since about 1840, and I have represented during that whole time entrepreneurs and their businesses in all the different kinds of stuff they do. And of course, entrepreneurs, including real estate folks, are often looking for capital because this is capitalism, and capital is the lifeblood of our economy. I mean, real estate folks, the joke is if you meet someone in real estate who is not looking for capital, call 911 because he's probably not breathing.
Yeah, right.
I've done a ton of, helping folks raise capital. So when the crowdfunding laws came on the horizon in 2012, I immediately said to myself, this is absolutely cool, and it's going to be transformative because crowdfunding is really, for all the technical legal details, crowdfunding is simple. It's just the internet coming to the capital formation industry. Just as it had already come to the retail industry, in Amazon and various competitors, and the dating industry, Match.com. But I mean, seriously, I mean, that's one of the best examples of what the internet does. In the past, to raise capital, if you wanted to raise capital for your real estate project, for example, what would you do? Let's say this is your first time out. I mean, there's no obvious way to start. You call your accountant, call your friends, call your lawyer. If you grew up in a wealthy family, you ask your parents.
Friends,
You just
family.
start friends and family, and start that whole quest, trying to meet people, getting introduced to people.
It's so fun, right?
And it's so fun. Well, think of dating. You decide, okay, I'm going to start dating. Well, where do you start looking? You know, go to Starbucks or whatever. But it's exactly the same. And so what the internet does in both cases is it just so vastly increases your opportunity. On the investment side, you can, using crowdfunding, immediately connect literally with every prospective investor in the world under the crowdfunding laws. And so, anyway, so I realized that was just going to be transformative and exciting. And I started to do that, and started to write a blog. And
Yeah, what'd you do with your first projects, or what's how did you help on these first crowdfunding deal?
well, it's not okay. I was going to say it's not that complicated. It is kind of complicated. But as soon as the word started to trickle out that there was this way, contrary to all prior laws, that there was this way that you could solicit investors publicly, that had always been absolutely no before, and now it becomes yes. So people started to call me to understand how that worked and to put those deals together for them. Those real estate syndications complying with all these new laws and all the different
Yeah.
types of
And
laws
not
and
go to
so forth,
jail and do it
and not
legally
go
and
to
ethically.
jail and not be sued. And I can't tell you how many people would call and say, no, that's not possible. You
Yeah.
can't do that because, of course, that's what they were being told by the lawyers that they had always used. Oh no, that guy, if he's telling you that's legal, that's wrong. You're gonna go to
Yeah.
jail.
Witchcraft.
Witchcraft.
Well, so I'm a nerd about the law. So what exactly in the law changed? What's like was it just, hey, you can't do this, now you can do this, or was it a bunch of different laws that happened at one time?
Well, yes to both questions, even though they seem contradictory. And I will become as granular as you like. So you
Yeah,
asked the
please.
question. So the law was the so-called, not so-called, the Jobs Act of 2012, which was signed into law, I think, on April 5th, 2012. And the Jobs Act created three different kinds of crowdfunding. The simplest and the most spectacularly successful from a real estate perspective was indeed, as to your first question, just a change. You couldn't do it before, you could do it now. Most syndications, real estate syndications, previously were done under SEC Rule 506, either only to accredited investors or to accredited plus 35 non-accredited. So Rule 506 used to be the place where most real estate syndications happened. One of the rules under Rule 506 was no advertising. Period. Don't do it. Go to jail. The Jobs Act simply changed that rule and said that now we have two types of Rule 506 offerings. The old type is Rule 506B, and all the same rules apply to that. But now we have Rule 506C, which says you can advertise, and the only requirement is that you have to verify that all your investors are accredited. So that was an example of, yeah, you couldn't do it before, and the law said now you can do it. And a
Thank,
few $1 billion of capital raised later, that has been spectacularly successful.
no, thank you for sharing that. I do like the granular nature of that. It is important because of that whole staying out of jail thing. If one day you couldn't do it, one day you could. That means the SEC changed and a lot of the rules behind that and consumer protections and some of those things, right?
Well, it amounted just to a simple new regulation issued by the SEC pursuant to that statute that said if you do this, namely verify that your investors are accredited,
Yeah,
that old rule, it was one of the subsections of Rule 502 that said no solicitation. That rule just doesn't apply then.
it's amazing.
It was flipping a switch.
Yeah. Well,
Uh, yeah,
it switched. It was a big switch then because from what you're saying, right? It activated the internet and then like
exactly. That
speed.
you get it. That's all it did. It said no internet before. Whoops! Now you can use the internet.
Yeah, this whole gigantic infinite world opens up for you.
That's right.
And that's why we've seen so many changes I mean, just since 2012. It's not been that long. It's been, 13 years. Let's get into that stuff. So people have been crowdfunding. You have been leading the charge, keeping everybody legal. Tell me about some of the folks you've worked with recently. And a lot of people are still afraid to pull investors into a deal, or they're still afraid to do a deal with the environment. What's going on with your folks today?
Oh my gosh. Yes, you're right. Some people, particularly in some areas of the country, like Philadelphia, where I live, there's almost no crowdfunding because the culture is just so. If my grandfather wasn't allowed to do it, I'm not doing it.
Yeah,
But other areas of the country, most areas now, California was the leader. Texas, as you might guess, has been another leader. Florida, New York. The clientele, it's everybody. It's the largest syndicators. I mean, I can't tell you my client names because that's
sure.
confidential, but some of the largest syndicators in the country are my clients and can just their level of syndications has just gone, through the roof.
Yeah.
Down to small developers and everyone in between. But my clients have certainly done hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, probably billions to this point. But when let me talk about the smaller part of it first. So, hey, I got this 10-unit property. I want to crowdsource it. It's a great deal. No one's ever seen anything like this. I come to Mark. Can you help me? How do we do this?
Yeah, and the good news is I can say yes to part of the question. Uh, The bad news is it's the part of the question that you're probably least interested in. So I will say, as I always do, I'm a boring corporate lawyer. I can absolutely make sure this is done legally with great, easy to understand documents and make sure you don't get yourself in any trouble and put all the right special provisions in your documents, anticipating, documents where you used to have four investors and now you have 40 or 400 are very different. And I give you all the right documents. Cool. And that's exciting to me. But what you're really asking is, can you help me raise the money?
Hmm.
And to that, my answer is no. I'm not an investment banker. And if you're a have a long track record, you might be able to get on one of the top real estate crowdfunding sites, get your deal listed, like on RealCrowd or CrowdStreet, and have an excellent chance of raising a lot of money from their established investor base. At the other end, if you're just starting out, guess what? You are now in the digital marketing business. So that's yeah, I have said since the beginning, crowdfunding is a marketing business. It
Mhm.
is not, you put up a website and suddenly everyone's beating on your door to write checks to you. It's not a build it and they will come.
But you are building it so that we can take it to market, essentially.
Oh yeah, I will build it. So it's absolutely ready for you to take it to market.
Let's talk about that. So, all right, yeah, I have this project. I know I'm going to be able to market this on Facebook. I have a small Facebook group or whatnot. So, what do? I show you the property. I tell you all the information. I pay you a retainer, and then you make sure I can go to market.
That's right. Yeah, I do all this stuff. I really end up giving you a set of legal documents that
Right.
are appropriate for your deal, appropriate for
Granular.
crowd.
I really want to know what documents, if you could share,
Sure.
what keeps us legal,
Yeah. So I'll answer your question in a couple different ways. The
please.
three documents in any real estate deal, or in almost any real estate deals, is the subscription agreement and the limited liability company agreement and the disclosure document, also known as a PPM. So,
Private placement memorandum.
private placement memorandum. And each of those does has a certain purpose, which I'm again more than happy to talk about. But it's the to stay out of jail. Let's just using that as a rough metaphor. Sort of that's the most important thing, and that's the disclosure document. That is what you tell people about the deal, what you say, and also what you don't say, and how clearly you say it, and how well you describe the risks of investing. Because, what you don't want is your investors, let's say the deal, I mean, if the deal triples in value and everyone gets rich, no one ever complains. And it turned out you didn't need legal documents because everyone's happy. But if the deal goes sideways or south, investors are unhappy. Or maybe one of your original investors has died and now his, his son-in-law, who's a personal injury lawyer, is unhappy and starts thinking about legal claims. And so the disclosure document is the main document that keeps people from suing you successfully after the fact if they've lost money. And so it's a super important document. The subscription agreement is also important. It's the terms of whereby they're buying interest, their interest in your real estate project, and you have to be
For
very
example,
careful.
sorry. For example, I'm going to put in $100,000 that gets me 25% or something.
Yes, yes, that's right. And that's the purchase agreement where you're buying those shares. That's the subscription agreement. The disclosure document is what tells you all about the deal, upsides and downsides. And then the LLC agreement is what governs the actual operation of the enterprise. So it's what talks about, the distribution waterfall, for example. Obviously, very important to
Right.
describe the
And,
distribution
and,
waterfall,
and just because people may not know, that is the profits,
how the money
typically.
comes out. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's typically a percentage. It's like 80% to the investor, 20% to the operator type thing.
Yeah, all different possibilities, income kinds of deals. A multifamily deal would be typical to have like a 7% preferred return to the investors and then maybe an 80-20 or 70-30 split. A development deal might not have talk about preferred returns. It might just talk about internal rates of return. So there's different kinds of distribution waterfalls, but you'd be amazed how many documents they're not described properly, and of course that's bad. So all has to work together. I can put that all together, but you still have to sell your deal. That's why
Well,
crowdfunding is a marketing business.
how about this? So I've talked to you. You put the documents together. Where do I file them, or who do I tell, or how do I make sure? With the is there someplace I put it?
No, not in Rule 506C. And again, we our whole conversation so far has been about one of the three kinds of crowdfunding. It's the simplest and has been by far the most successful. Rule 506C requires no government approval and no even government filing, except you have to file a very simple piece of paper with the SEC called a Form D. Says nothing about the offering really. It's just an informational tool.
File that with Mr. Edgar.
File it through Mr. Edgar, and then you have to file a very simple notice in each state where one of your investors live. But almost nothing. I mean, it's very, very straightforward. So one of the tenets of American securities laws is rich people can take care of themselves, and rich people and accredited investor have sort of historically coincided. So in Rule 506C, by definition, it's only accredited investors. And therefore, the government takes a very, very hands off approach. So, no filings, no approval. And so it's sort of wild, wild west, except, you can get sued by your investors.
And I don't even think I told you this or this, but I run a private equity fund. Everything you're saying is what I've done. The accredited investor portion, right? You're saying, hey, these consumers are different and they're versed. What does it take to be an accredited investor? How do I, as somebody who's working with you, how do I make sure they're an accredited investor?
Well, the basic definition hasn't changed since 1982. That is a long time ago, 41 years. And for an individual, it's the same as it was then. It's $200,000 of income, or 300,000 you and your significant other, your spouse, or $1 million net worth without taking your primary residence into account. And so you can see, I mean, 40 years of inflation, even gradual inflation. Back in 1982, earning $200,000 meant a heck of a lot more. I think it's the equivalent is like 500,000 or 600,000 today. But the rules haven't changed. The SEC hasn't changed it. A couple years ago, they modified the definition a little to include a few more people, like people who have certain FINRA licenses, have passed FINRA exams.
Series
Um,
7, stuff like that.
that yeah, stuff like that. But it's still it's I think about 8% of the population is accredited, 7%, something like that. And under Rule 506, under the old syndications, if you wanted to know if your investor was accredited, you just asked her, "Are you accredited?" She says yes. You say, "Okay, check." You can't do that anymore. Under 506C, you have to either um, verify yourself, for example, by asking your investors to see their tax returns, which investors don't want to share with you, or you use a third party. So the biggest player in that provider is a company called Verify Investor.
We use them.
You use them. That was started by a buddy of mine named
Really?
Sean Law. Oh yeah, it's
I
a
would like
small
to shake
world.
that man's hand and thank him.
Well, he sold the company. Um, and the way it usually works, all the investor needs to do is to get a letter from her lawyer or accountant saying, "Yep, she's accredited," and then you can rely on that. So it's a
Thank
pretty
you.
pretty straightforward process. You pay about $40 per investor, something like that.
And then that's the Wonka ticket, right? Because when you get that, you can then go invest in any fund you want or
Yes,
any syndication, and then you're looking for good operators. Let's talk about that for a minute. So you obviously have some good operators and some national folks, some pretty big guys. Are they creating documentation for single properties, like $50 million development? Is it for a group of properties? Can you share some of that?
it's both. Wealthy investors, as you probably know, in your capacity, wealthy investors, many of them think that they're just as good at your business as you are, and they want to do their own due diligence on properties. So even if you've done, a million multifamily projects or a million industrial projects, very wealthy institutional investors want to invest on a project by project basis because they want to do their own due diligence. So I would say most of the market is single asset syndications.
Can you give me some examples, just like size?
It can be anything. I mean, you're not going to probably in crowdfunding. So this is kind of a deeper issue, but deals that the sweet spot I would say these days is maybe you're raising a few $1 million of equity. Deals have been crowdfunded raising 25 or $30 million of equity. So now you're talking about an asset probably close to $100 million asset. Those have been crowdfunded and continue to be, but most of the volume is at lower levels. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is so just to take sort of an extreme example where
Yeah.
crowdfunding has not been useful is single family homes. There's no successful crowdfunding of loans, mortgage loans for owner occupied single family homes. Why is that? It's because the market for those mortgages is already incredibly efficient, where all the players, big players, have access to extremely granular information, by zip code and all that. So what the internet does is it weeds out inefficiencies. That's, bypasses middlemen,
Hmm.
bypasses experts. And so at what it's really good at in the crowdfunding space is funding deals as to which there would otherwise be limited information. A deal, a 10 or $20 million deal in Austin or something, that's not on anybody's radar or not on very many people's radar. So crowdfunding can come in and make lots of people aware of that deal and share information about it, you know, make it a very efficient deal.
Hmm.
If someone is building a $3 billion office tower in Manhattan, you don't need crowdfunding to make that an efficient deal because all the potential investors, all the hedge funds, all the banks, they already know everything there is to know about that deal. There's no one
Curiosity.
doesn't know who should know, and so crowdfunding doesn't isn't needed for those deals. Um, I don't know. It's like I'm just going to try to use a stupid Match.com
Please,
metaphor.
please.
Um,
That's how I met
you
my wife.
know,
I'm just kidding. I'm
it,
just
it
kidding.
could be.
Yeah.
A lot of people do,
Yeah.
but and to go back, some years, you don't need Match to know who Pamela Anderson is, right?
That's right.
Um,
Baywatch.
but right, but you do need to know that there's, an eligible person who lives in your same city or something. So
No,
it's
it's
a
it's
bad, it's a bad analogy, but the internet is about sharing information and creating efficiencies,
Uh,
and
yeah,
the smaller market is just more appropriate for that reason.
I hate it that I got to call time soon, but that is a good point to end on. The internet is beautiful. Real estate is beautiful. You are putting a roof over people's heads. I think a lot of people think about multifamily and I'm going to, going to the bank every day with your tenants' checks, but we're taking care of people's families. That amount of money that's going towards the taxes or paying for a good school nearby. I think people just forget that this is a very beautiful business and you've done a lot. You've probably helped house, I don't know, tens of thousands of people at this point,
More than that, I
hundreds
would
of
certainly
thousands.
hope.
Yeah,
Um, but but let me just um, before we finish, I do want to make one point because
please.
we have been talking, as these conversations always do, because of the people asking the questions, like you. You are a person interested in raising money, and so you view this from the lens, for one end of the telescope, the person raising money. What does the world look like? How do I use this new tool to do what I want to do? And that's the normal perspective. And lawyers and other experts in the field get hired by people like you to help them raise money. The key is the industry, the other benefit to the industry is the benefit to the investors. Again, Match.com, it works both ways. It's not just, both people have to be looking. And so investors traditionally in this country, up until now, the best deals have been available only to very wealthy people, family
Hmm.
offices, institutions. Okay. The rest of even the accredited investor pool of Americans has, we don't, people haven't been able to get in these deals. You have to buy the Vanguard 500 index fund and just hope for the best. So, the other great thing about crowdfunding, not only does it help people like you raise capital, it helps ordinary Americans have access to institutional quality investments. That's that's what makes it great,
The
right? We have
protection.
these income and uh, net worth inequalities in this country.
Hmm.
Crowdfunding allows us to address some of that, makes great investments available to ordinary Americans. And if you think about it, it can only be successful if it does both. You know, you can
Yeah,
only attract investors if you're giving them something good.
right.
And it's giving investors something good that is itself an enormous social benefit.
Yeah,
So
I
I just,
love that. I love that. No, that is beautiful, and I don't
it
think
is.
about that all the time. Luckily, I have great investors, and I get to see the other side of it. But just stating that is a reason to be in the business. You're
It
providing a
is.
good, and you're standing by that good. You're warranting that good with your operation and your profitability and your
Yeah.
knowledge and your lawyer because you need a mark.
Well, I mean, I have clients who, a number of clients who could have raised hundreds of millions of dollars from institutions.
Yeah.
And they made the decision, you know what, I want to make these investments available to ordinary Americans. And they raised hundreds of millions of dollars from ordinary Americans, and they got better terms, by the way,
Yeah.
from the ordinary Americans than they could have from the institutions.
And
So
those ordinary Americans are extraordinary Americans.
they're now and they're wealthier now.
There you go.
So yeah, it's a great thing. That's kind of why I'm so evangelical
No,
about crowdfunding.
I love it. I don't think enough people are. Mark, my producer, is going to kill me. I have everything to get a hold of Mark in the show notes. Mark, you want to share your website real quick?
Well, my blog, where there's a ton of information, is called crowdfundingattorney.com. So sort of couldn't be simpler than that.
Definitely. Check it out. World of Knowledge. Mark, thank you so much. We'll check you guys out soon. Cheers.
Thank you very much.